Welcome to Simple Conversation with ASG.
Follow your new favorite podcast host with a link in the description.
For 25 years, Seth Lightman has seen it all. From the newest electric car revolution, solar power, bike lanes made in NYC. And now we are here. More electric cars, need for more renewables and eco-friendly products in our world. Well, now it's time for an all-out podcast for this time, The Green Living Guy Show. He's funny, real, exactly on point, and some think his style is so raw, it's crazy. Let's do this, folks. It's time for The Green Living Guy Show.
Do you want a podcast on green living? For over 25 years, podcaster Seth Lightman has been into electric cars and solar since the 90s. Now he wants to bring his experience, New York attitude, and love for green living to the masses so that we can all have fun, live greener, and save this planet for generations to come. They say a true man plants a tree that will never sit in the shade. That's the green living guy, Seth Lightman at heart. He is also an author and editor of 9 Green Guru Guides and has worked for New York State for 10 years doing green. For more information, visit greenlivingguy.com and subscribe to his podcast.
So, tell me, who is Bruce Chamoff?
Bruce Chamoff is probably one of the most creative people in the world.
Ooh.
I think out of the box. I don't procrastinate. An idea comes to me and it's implemented usually within a week. I'm not a planner. Whenever I have an idea, I hate waiting. I hate planning to make it happen. So I just immediately, as soon as I get a free moment, which is usually within 24 hours, I write down a few little items as to how I want the income to come out, and it happens. And that's exactly how the World Podcast Network was formed and founded. Other than that, Bruce is also a musician with 5 albums on Spotify, original music, and 27 singles, and just having a lot of fun making things happen creatively.
Quite done. So, and I love that bit at the start about you being one of the most creative people, because when you Google your name, it literally says Godfather of podcast networks. That's just the perfect little tagline.
Exactly.
So, Bruce, what's been annoying you this week?
What has been what?
Annoying you this week.
Oh, what's been annoying me? Just stress. I mean, everybody has stress. You can't get rid of it. No matter how good your life is, you have stress. You have other people causing stress. You have uncontrollable things causing stress. And really, that's what's been annoying me, But, you get over it, you get past it, and you stop being annoyed eventually.
Do you have any quirky ways to manage your stress? Because I know everyone kind of deals with it different. And I've heard some absolutely absurd ways people have dealt with stress that don't make sense to me, but obviously make sense to them.
Well, yeah, everybody's different, right? My way is very simple. I just write everything down. If something's bothering me and I'm constantly thinking about it and it's bothering me, why should you have to think about something and have it stress you out, which will cause physical illness eventually, right? So I like to write things down, but I don't write it down with a paper and pen. I enter it into somewhere online. It could be an online journal. It could be a personal blog. Sometimes it's just my phone, but whatever it is, that's my way to relieve stress. And it works.
I've heard that one before. I think it might be Tim Ferriss said that he started like a side blog. It was basically his way of journaling without actually journaling, because he thought the idea of journaling down your thoughts and writing basically your own story was cringy. So he started writing it on a screen and editing it and then uploading it. And he didn't really think anything of it, but he went back and it's like gone incredibly viral. I don't know what it is. That people were commenting underneath like, I don't know why it seems like this is my brain talking to me. It's a really like niche way of dealing with stress, but it's not that as uncommon as you may think.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got their own way of doing it, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you what's annoying me this week, and you're involved in podcasting, so you're going to probably have some kind of relation to this. But I've been editing my clips for quite a while now, and you have to listen to your own voice quite a lot, which kind of does get the hairs up in your back a little bit. But I've noticed I may have some form of mental either delay or disability. So I, for some reason, don't process what people say in real time.
I'm the same way.
I think mine's going to have a different result though. I've been going through, and I didn't understand for so long why I have so much editing to do for the main episode, because I recorded in real time, so it should just be uploaded. But I've realized when someone says something to me, I think I'm snapping back a reply right as they finish. But in reality, it's maybe 5 to 10 seconds after they've said the thing. My brain's like, this is the perfect time to interrupt what they're going to say next and give them my reply.
That's not a bad thing. You know, that's actually pretty common. And I do the same thing. It all depends on, first of all, who it is. And it also depends on what the subject matter is, right? Sometimes you will know right away what the person means and you'll have a response. And sometimes you need to think about it. I'm the same way, like you said, it happens in podcasting. I mean, especially when you're getting questions from people, right? You don't know what those questions are going to be like. You don't know what they're going to be in general. So sometimes you're not prepared for a specific answer, and that makes you have to think about it. Nothing wrong with that. That's just the way. I get it.
Yeah, it was quite funny to realize it, because I realized it last week when Johnny Vedmore, I brought him on purposely. I was based the whole purpose of last week's episode, for anyone that's listening to this now that listened to it. My whole purpose was, I don't really want to speak much because he's an investigative journalist and has exposed some of like the worst people in the world. So I wanted him to just go off on a ramble, and that was the agreement we had, was he was basically going to come on and rant. And I've noticed it in that I was on a delay. And then this week, in just very normal social situations, I started to really pick up on it. And I was like kind of sitting back in the shop recently, and I was like I'd never realized I had this, but everyone else has met me, probably knows I have this little delay, but I've never realized it myself.
Yeah, it happens.
Funny. It's funny things you learn through podcasting and listening to your own voice.
You know, your voice is your voice. You can't change it, right? I mean, just like you can't change a lot of physical characteristics about yourself. These are sometimes you look in the mirror and you look at yourself and you say, I don't like that about myself, or I don't like that. I don't like that. You know what? You can't change those things. Maybe you can change it. I mean, there are ways you could change things. I'll give you a perfect example. My teeth. Okay. I have very white teeth, but my bottom row of my teeth, I have crowning. And I've seen a lot of people like that. And sometimes I can't look at somebody when they're talking, when they have crowding in their teeth. And it's really funny because when I was a teenager, like most teenagers, I had braces. No problem. They straightened out my teeth. I was all good. The braces came off. Then I was wearing a retainer. And what I didn't actually hear the orthodontist tell me was that you need to wear the retainers for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And there's where I went totally wrong with my teeth. So my wisdom teeth came in. I was around 20 years old. And the retainer one morning just didn't come off.
It's stuck.
Okay. I mean, it came off, but it was really tight. It hurt. And that's because there was crowding in my mouth going on that the retainers no longer fit. Okay. And that's the whole story about it. I never went back. I realized that I don't need the retainers anymore, which is obviously a mistake because they just didn't fit. And every morning, I figured the first time it happened, I took the retainer off. It scraped my teeth. It hurt for about a second. And I figured maybe I took it off wrong. I put my fingers in wrong and I angled it wrong and it went against my teeth. No biggie, right? The very next day, I wake up, it happens again. And I said, what's going on with me? What am I doing wrong here? Third day, it happened again. And then I realized something's wrong. So I just stopped wearing the retainer, which now my top teeth are fine, but my bottom teeth are obviously there's a middle tooth. I don't know what you call it. I think it's the bicuspid. It's a little further back because it got pushed back that way,
Yeah.
not the retainer. And every time I look at myself in a YouTube video, and I just came out with a music video, I can't believe that I actually let that go. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, I don't want people to see this music video, but because my teeth, they look horrible, but it's a great music video and the song is good. So what do I do? And it's like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. So I'm now looking into Invisalign, which is the invisible braces now. I could go back to that, or another company out there that's competitors with Invisalign are called Bite. But you can change, you can fix your teeth like that, right? There are certain aspects of your body you just can't fix, right? And your voice is probably one of them. I mean, people can get voice changes. I mean, you can change any part of your body, but people won't do it, right? Most people won't even do it. So if you don't like your voice, deal with it. I don't like my voice either, but I've come to accept it because what am I going to do? What am I going to walk into some surgeon and say, "Can you change out my vocal cords for some other guy that has a deeper voice?" It's the way it is.
Yeah.
Nothing. So don't worry about it.
Yeah, there's a podcast that I'm obsessed with called Modern Wisdom, and the host is like, he used to be like typical like UK party boy, but he always said that like nobody could ever like kind of understand what he was saying. Like words he would say, he would pronounce them differently to everyone else. And whenever he started podcasting, he started doing like an extensive like voice activation exercise before he hit record. And one of his guests was like, "Why are you doing that?" And he said, "If you go through the first 10 episodes of my podcast, every 25 minutes and I think 39 seconds or something, he had it to the second, my voice cracks." And he was like, "If I have to listen to that for the next 5 to 10 years, I'm genuinely going to mute my parts of my own podcast and just put it as you."
I'm sorry, repeat that last thing you said.
He said he created this like voice activation exercise thing that he does before every recording, because he had it to the detail in his first 10 episodes. Every 20 minutes and something seconds, his voice would go either really high or go really low for just a split second. And he said
I heard that
triggered him so much that he started developing exercises to stop his voice from ever getting too flat or too high, and he's completely changed how he prepares for podcasting now.
I mean, I guess that's okay. I mean, some people just don't care. People are going to notice it, but they're not. What I realize is that people are more interested in the content, not what the content actually sounds like or who is actually developing it. If you don't like your voice, then you're never going to like podcasting. It's that simple. You can't engage in something that makes you go, "Oh my gosh, well, I got to change that." And then you don't want to change it because it either costs money or it costs surgery or both. What are you going to do? You know what I mean? So a voice is a very good example of that. It's probably going to be surgery if you really want to change your voice. You're probably going to have, and then you probably won't be able to talk anyway as your vocal cords after surgery are healing. So you can't podcast anyway after that. It kind of defeats the purpose, and it might go wrong, and then you'll never podcast again. Like that's the worst case scenario, right? I mean, obviously it might work out great, and a week later you're fine. You're getting back on your podcast, and that guy's voice is no longer going up and down. But can you really afford to take that risk? I mean, it's sort of like if you're an Olympic athlete and now all of a sudden you develop a blood clot in your leg and you have to have surgery to remove that blood clot. There's a chance you might never run again. So, and then what are you gonna say? I don't want to run because I had this blood clot. I mean, you have to. So there are just some things of the human body you just can't change, I guess. And I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, there's now AI voices out there. You can record your voice and just put it through an AI. So maybe that guy can just record his voice monotone so it doesn't go up and down. There's so many things you can do, but you also have to, not you in general, I'm saying people in general have to realize that there are things they just can't change. I mean, I'm a public speaker. I spoke all over the United States before the pandemic. And actually, it's funny because you're from Ireland, and it was suggested that I come to Dublin and I do. It was basically a web development presentation, and I did it in Canada, which was in Vancouver, which was really cool. And actually, Vancouver was my second largest audience under the United Nations in New York City. And then every other city in the United States was smaller than that, which is, it's kind of interesting that the Canadian audience was one of my biggest audiences. And I would love to go overseas and come to your country and other countries in Europe. It would be kind of cool. I think though that some things cross my mind too, right? I'm an American. I have an American accent. If I come to Dublin, my audience is going to have an Irish accent, and how am I going to sound? You know, do I let that bother me? No, because I've seen people from the UK talk in America. I have friends in Germany that talk to an American audience, and sometimes you understand the person's accent, sometimes you don't. It's just the risk you take. You got to have fun doing it. And podcasting is just like that too. I mean, so just accept what you can accept, and if you can't, change it. That's what I always say.
It's true words of wisdom. So we need to
Definitely.
we have to get on to the big hallmark of who Bruce Chamoff is, and you and well, in today's kind of content creation world, podcasting's all became a massive thing, and you are in what seems to be quite a booming era of content creation in terms of podcasting. You own a piece of history, which is you were the creator of the first podcast network, and if I'm not wrong, you pretty much, I wouldn't say discovered, but you put forward the term podcast network.
Yes, I believe I did, and I will say that all the way for the long haul. And make a long. Want me to tell the long story? I can, but to make a long story short, in 2005, podcasting became podcasting, and a lot of people don't know that because they didn't discover podcasting till after the pandemic. But it's been around a long time, and I'm a web developer. I create programs on the web and web applications. So I wanted to start my podcast, which was the Fresh Music series. It was all about music, and I promoted other artists in my local area. And then I decided I'm a marketing person, I'm a computer programmer, I'm a visionary. Why don't I just build a website that has multiple podcasts on it? We didn't have Spotify yet. We didn't even have Facebook yet. We didn't have any of those sites we have now. And I did it. I didn't know what I figured, and here's the end of this really short story. I figured TV network, radio network, why not podcast network? And that's how it came to be.
It's crazy hearing it now because there's so many different podcast networks now, and not just podcast networks. There's podcasts that I know that are sponsored by actual companies. There's a lot of like sport podcasts that are sponsored by betting companies or by shoe companies. So like whenever you did actually come to the kind of the drawing up process of, right, I want to create this network of podcasts, was there anything in specific you were trying to do with it, or was it just you wanted all podcasts in one area?
I was living on Long Island at the time, and for those people that don't know where Long Island is, it's to the east of New York City. And if you look at the map of New York City, and it's funny because people who are not from the United States always ask me, where is Long Island? I never heard of Long Island before. So it is, if you look at New York City on Google Maps, you'll notice there's a really tiny peninsula that extends out to the east in the Atlantic Ocean, and that's Long Island. And a lot of famous actors and rock bands came from there. So that's where I was at that moment when the podcast network was created. It was actually called the Long Island Podcast Network, and all the podcasts were basically out of that area. So that's where that came from.
Yes, you wanted it to be like kind of local more than anything.
At that time, yeah. And then in 2017, it became the New York City Podcast Network. And in 2023, it became the World Podcast Network.
Yeah. So what made you transition into the World Podcast Network? Did you just kind of not want to be in a box?
Exactly. That's exactly why. I wanted to extend globally. Or actually, the word is expand. I wanted to expand globally, and that's what we did. And now we have podcasts from, we don't have it from hundreds of countries, which I can't wait for that to happen, but we have podcasts from about 20 different countries.
Yeah, I have no doubt that in the very near future that will enter the hundreds for you, because it
Yep.
seems every 2 days there's another 100 new podcasts. Like,
Yep.
I was so interested in hearing you say that whenever you started in 2005, that's when podcasting was basically alive. And I know people listening to this are going to be like, "There's not possible," because Joe Rogan didn't start until 2010.
Yes.
It's the framework as that Joe Rogan is the creator of all podcasts.
Yeah. I mean, well, what was that? Joe Rogan, what'd you say, is the creator of all podcasts?
That's kind of like the stereotype now is if you go on a podcast like, oh, you want to be Joe Rogan, he created them.
Actually, the Godfather of podcasts is named Adam Curry.
Adam Curry.
Now, I don't know what the media was like in the 80s in Ireland, but in the United States, and maybe we did have it in Ireland too, but we had MTV. So MTV, MTV was music television, and they had videos from artists all over the world. And of course, the big rock band that was out of Ireland at that time, I believe, was U2. I don't know if U2, I think, aren't they from Ireland, or are they from Scotland? I can never remember. But I know they're from...
I'm not too sure. I know they have massive fan bases in both. I'll Google,
Yeah.
but I think they are. I think they might be Scotland.
Maybe Scotland. Yeah, I can't remember.
Never mind. Oh, I'm going to get crucified by the Irish community. They're from Ireland.
I also remember Big Country, and they were a really cool band back then in the 80s. So we, when we had MTV, they were the first. I mean, technically, they were the first YouTube when you think about it, and they had videos. I mean, the YouTube wasn't even around yet. I don't even know if Google was even around yet. So I think Google was formed in 1993 or 4. Maybe I'm getting my dates wrong, but yeah, MTV was popular, and I remember watching. Adam Curry was a VJ, a video jockey, and apparently he's the one that started the first podcast in the world. I don't think he did it right after Apple released the iPod, and I think that's where that came from. So, and at that time, I think Joe Rogan was the host of the what was that show where people did all types of stunts for money?
Fear Factor.
Fear Factor, yes, exactly. And that's when he actually had hair.
Yeah, it's weird seeing him whenever he was younger, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's so strange. But whenever you think of like even those people that were big in radio, like even Charlemagne and things, those were really big in radio. That was technically podcasting.
Yeah.
They had a radio show. Like, radio shows obviously still exist, but I mean, well, they kind of exist. They're there, but no one really listens to them. But people like Charlemagne and even like Howard Stern, whenever he had his interview show, that was technically a podcast.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I mean, Howard Stern was all talk radio, obviously. And when he went on XM Sirius, he continued from there, and he paid him a lot of money. I mean, he did what he did before Joe Rogan did. So I think a Howard Stern podcast would be very successful. He doesn't need to do that because he has people who already do it for him on XM, and he's got his co-host. He's got Robin Quiver. So, hey, you're right. I mean, people were podcasting before that. It's true.
Yeah, Howard Stern, I would say, probably doesn't get put in that bubble because his niche was the very famous people. Like any
Yes,
big celeb he had on. Joe Rogan, I would
absolutely.
say, becomes more of a podcaster because it's scientists and philosophers that you probably don't know, but they have interesting stories and they're very smart. So it kind of makes you feel like it's more of a normal conversation rather than broadcaster interviewing celebrity.
Yes.
Obviously, that's evolved now. Joe Rogan's the biggest audience on the planet by a country mile.
I mean, he has some pretty big guests as well.
Yeah, it comes with the territory, I suppose. I suppose he can't really be who he is without doing it.
Yes. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, I agree with that. I mean, he's had musicians and he's had all types of people there too. So I definitely think that he pretty much knows what he's doing as well. I mean, he's basically the Howard Stern of the podcast world. I guess you can call that, right?
really is. I seen at the start of this year, Spotify. Know how whenever you click onto a Spotify podcast, there's no display of the followers or like the view of the viewers or anything. It's very like kind of hidden.
Yeah, there's not. You're right.
At the start of the year, they released like the most followed podcast shows, and I think they were all the top 10 was all really like 2 million to 3 million subscribers, and then all of a sudden, at number one is Joe Rogan with 14. He's 10 million more than second place. It just shows the audience that he has is. It's not. It probably if you seen it in numbers, it wouldn't even look like it's real.
Exactly.
So when you transitioned then to the World Podcast Network, was there anything you did different to whenever it was local? Because obviously you're trying to hit a different type of person completely, really.
Not really. Other than the fact that we started recording with every podcast that joins, we mark down what the country is. And being a programmer and a visionary at the same time, whenever I whatever idea pops into my head, I can usually implement that and release it. And with that said, there's the next step is to have a country directory, which is very easy for me to do. I mean, it's all I got to do is write a little code and put the page up. And what it will do is it will group all the podcasts together from a specific country. And to me, that's not only inevitable, it's necessary. Like when you call yourself, when you put the word world into your company name, you better serve the world. Let's put it that way,
Yeah.
and you better. I mean, in my opinion, you can't call yourself the world anything without breaking down what you do by country, and it makes perfect sense to me. Maybe continent as well, European podcasts and North American podcasts and so forth. But I I think I think continents are a little broad, so countries are a little better. We do actually also record the continent down as well. I mean, if you're from Japan, we also say you're from Asia, but we don't actually publish the continent name yet. I don't see a need for that. But I will
It's in the
say
back end.
maybe. I mean, I don't know if it's necessary to say. I mean, I could say, hey, we have 3,000 European podcasts and we have 5,000 Asian podcasts. And so I don't see a need for that. I think it's better to say we have 1,000 podcasts from Ireland, you know what I mean? 10,000 podcasts from the United States, and you know what I mean? Like 15,000 from Australia and so forth. To me, that makes more sense. And then you just show the country flag and then you got yourself a nice country directory.
Yeah,
And
I realize that.
yeah, other than
'Cause,
that, I don't see a need. I don't see it. I mean, there's no other change.
yeah, I've recently signed up to your podcast network, and I realized that when I clicked on to the page, because I just wanted to see what it looked like as
Yeah.
someone coming onto the website seeing my podcast page, and I seen the Ireland flag, and I thought it was such a nice touch because there's directories and stuff that my podcast is listed on, and you couldn't really tell who like what area the podcast would be for because I have a lot of like guests that are from America, England, and from Europe, but you wouldn't like it. Nobody clicking onto my page that it's just a load of writing and no real niche or no real country attached to it would understand that this is maybe better suited for UK people because I'm from the UK and I speak in different terms than someone from America.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's kind of cool that when I go to the Simple Conversations page, I mean, I do see what it says, and I think it's really cool that anybody who hears your podcast and they're from Ireland and they know you're from Ireland, or they hear your accent and they say, hey, he's from Ireland, then
Yeah,
they can obviously definitely see the American flag if that's the case.
yeah.
So I think it's really cool. We don't have a lot from Ireland right now, but hopefully we will. And there's no hyperlink just yet on the flag itself, but that's one of the next steps that are coming in the very near future. So you see somebody from a particular country with the country flag, and you click on the country flag, and it will take you to a directory of all the podcasts in that country. And to me, that's really a good thing.
Yeah, I think that you may be waiting a few years before you get an influx of Irish podcasts because there's not really a scene here for content creation. Even though I'm going to shoot myself in the foot saying that, because in a few weeks' time I hope to have probably one of the biggest creators in Ireland on the podcast, which he's going to go into detail of why there isn't a scene. But yeah, hopefully it becomes a thing and you get more podcasts from the and around these areas onto it. But something I did want to ask you when I was researching you and I was learning about the World Podcast Network is podcast networks do have a little bit of a bad name, and it's mainly because the big potential damaging factor of signing your brand or your podcast to a network is you could lose creative control, or you could kind of lose control over day-to-day admin tasks. Is there anything that you specifically, whenever you were starting out and you were saying, right, I'm creating this podcast network that's going to serve everybody in the world, was there anything that you were absolutely sure you were not going to do to eliminate that possibility?
When I started it, I didn't have that vision just yet. I didn't have that concern. It was just a pet project of mine. And I wasn't even sure podcasting was even going to last. It might have been at that point a trend. It's not a trend. I mean, it's actually a marketing strategy for a lot of companies. And it's also sort of like your own TV show without having to break into broadcasting. But no, I didn't have any preconceived notions about what would happen, about what wouldn't happen. And would the world hear me? I wasn't sure. My focus at that time was the local area. And going globally came to me obviously about 11 years later. And that's what happened. But now that I'm here and this is my attitude about the whole thing, I'm enjoying it. I really am. I'm glad I did it. My my vision is organic, meaning that, as I said in the beginning of this conversation, I'm not very much of a planner. What I do is I get an idea, and I do have a release list of features that I want to release, but I don't plan how they're going to get released or even when. All I do is I pick from the list of what I want to release as soon as possible, and we start working on it. We do have a team of people because this podcast network has grown so fast over the last couple of years since the pandemic that I can't do it anymore. So my girlfriend helps me. Her name is Shari. She's on some of my podcasts, which is called Become a Successful Podcaster. And my daughter works for me as well. So she does some work. And I tell people this too. When I was a kid, a lot younger than my daughter is now, I worked for my dad. And my father, unfortunately, passed away in 2005. But when I worked for him, it was a really exciting thing to do. and he was an accountant. So I was learning accountant at the age of 8. It was amazing, which I don't do it now. But what I do feel having my daughter work for me is like I'm giving back to my father. And it's such a great feeling. I mean, I'm doing for my daughter what my father did for me. It's such an amazing feeling when you can do that. And not a lot of people and business owners can say that. I mean, yeah, I get it. Like a lot of business owners will employ their kids to work for them until they get a job that they really want or whatever. They get some experience in the office or whatever. But a lot of those business owners did not work for their dads. So that's kind of where my foundation is for being the type of father and type of business owner I am. I get to combine those things just like my dad did for me. And actually, my sister also used to work for my father too when she was younger. So it's a cool feeling.
It's actually very interesting you brought that up, because I had it on my notes to try and move into this in some way, but there's been a few business owners that I've spoke to away from the podcast long before I had the podcast, but there's been then one or two that's been recorded, maybe that didn't go out, but they've mentioned the danger and the kind of apprehensiveness of mixing friends and family with business. And it's quite cool that you've actually employed your family to help you grow the business. Is there anything that you think maybe that is a myth or a stigma that has led to people believing that you can't mix, your personal relationship with business?
It really depends on the relationship you have with your kids. And obviously, everybody is different. If you don't have a good relationship personally with your child or your own parents, then you're not going to have a good work relationship with them either. I mean, think about that.
That's very true.
That's very true. My daughter and I, she was a teenager, and teenage girls, I mean, she's not a teenager anymore. She's fully grown. She didn't talk to me for a couple of years. I definitely couldn't hire her at that time because she wasn't talking to me. And if I did, I don't think it would have gone well. But now we get along great. She talks to me, I talk to her, everything's perfect, and she works for me. And I think that people have to not be concerned so much about mixing family and business, like you said, but really you have to have, as I mentioned, you have to have a very good family relationship with that relative of yours before you even try working with that person in a professional setting, because it will never happen. And also, it works the other way too. You have to have a good business relationship, because if you don't, it will affect your personal relationship in the family with that kid too. And then other family members are going to be affected by this too, right? So it has to work on both levels or it just won't work at all. And it does for me. And it's interesting because even when I tell my daughter, hey, you should be doing it this way, do it that way. I know you are your own person. You do things your own way. I get it. But when you're a business owner, you have to expect your employees, whether they're related or not, to do things your way, because it is your business, right? And she has never, knock on wood, never say never, but she has not yet given me any resistance or negative feedback about the way I want her to do things. She just says, okay. So it's great. Yeah, it's great. I don't have that problem.
Yeah, that was what I kind of came to the conclusion myself, was that people couldn't really separate the when to be in a businessman and when to be a human, basically. And whenever I had mentioned on Twitter to someone that you were coming on my podcast, and someone whose podcast you were on, Better Call Daddy, messaged
Rena.
me, and she said that she heard one of her favorite quotes, and whenever she said it to me, it actually made a lot of sense.
I know that. I know what that is. Go ahead.
Daddies don't know everything.
Yep.
That is such a perfect line, because when I heard it, the first thing came to my mind was anyone that ever says that their partner's having a baby, first thing they always say is, I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know what to do. And that quote summed up everything. I was like, you don't need to know.
Well, you are not your daddy is not you. And especially if you're into totally different things than your own parents, right? Yeah, so Rena is an amazing person, and I'm definitely going to tell her, I'm going to thank her for mentioning me, which was very interesting to you. And what happened is it's a very simple story. It's a very quick story. When I was a kid, I remember sitting on the couch with my father one morning, and I said, Daddy, I don't know how old I was. I must have been 3, 4, something like that. And I said, how'd you know that? And he said, because daddies know everything. And you believe that because you are a kid, you don't know much. You're still brand new in this world. You don't know anything technically other than what you already learned up to that age. And you still haven't gone through school, you haven't gone to college, you haven't gone to high school, you have no experience in the workforce, obviously. So any adult, it's not just your parent, any adult who tells you I know everything, you're going to believe that because you don't know anything. But there comes a time in your life when you get to a certain age that you start learning things that your parents never learned. And then when your father comes to you and says, daddies know everything, I go, you don't, because you don't know how to, said, you don't know how to do this thing, but I do. And a perfect example of that is my computer programming. My father couldn't program one line of code. Okay. So daddies don't know everything. It's true. I mean, there comes a time when they just don't, but they do for a long time. I mean, obviously they know more than you. They know a lot more than you because they're an adult. They've been to school. And it comes a time when your knowledge and your experience starts diverging from your parents. And then all of a sudden you have a totally different skill set than what your parents has. And then let your father come and tell you that daddies know everything. Then you're just going to sit there and laugh at him. Right. Especially,
so
yeah, I
true.
mean, I took a database programming course. And I program in databases every day now since the last 10 years. And the first thing my father said to me when I first started learning is, actually, no, it's been 20 years. The first thing my father said to me is, you don't find that difficult? And I said, no. And right then and there is when I realized that daddies don't know everything, because he probably would find it difficult. So that's where that whole little proverb came into being.
Yeah, it's so fun. I was just so funny hearing it because, especially because I had pretty much done all my research on you, but I'd reached out to her because I had seen that she had you on, so I just wanted to get a little bit of background. And whenever you said it, was so funny because I was in the middle of researching when podcasts really blew up and became what they were now, and I seen it was like 10 years after you created the podcast network, and it was so funny seeing it because it was like there's no way he knew that was ever going to happen either.
Yeah, I didn't. But I don't think anybody can predict the future like that. I mean, you work with what you have at the time. You release whatever you want to release. And you have to have the attitude that things will change. They'll change either direction. They'll change for the better or for the worse. If they change for the better, great. You enjoy it. You go along with the ride. And that's what I'm doing right now with the World Podcast Network. Sometimes things go wrong, and you have to have a plan B. Or you fix whatever went wrong and you make it better and you move on. But you can't predict the future. You just have to expect the future to change. And once you do that, then things will be a lot easier when they do change. That's how I look at it.
Did it not just feel like you won the lottery though when podcasting just blew up out of nowhere and you were like, my God, I have this podcast network that is set up perfectly for this?
I did feel that way. Absolutely.
It's amazing because there's like an old school podcaster who him and his host, they pretty much just, they sit down with drinks and they load up news pages and just go through them. And they were doing it for so long. Like I think they started it in like 2008 or so, but they both like done a anniversary episode recently, and they were saying that like they were sitting at home and all of a sudden they had notifications on for new viewers or new followers for the podcast, and all of a sudden one night the phone just was almost on fire. It started just with an influx of notifications, and they were sitting there like, I genuinely don't know how this even happened, but I'm glad I started my podcast, but there was no way I could have ever thought this was going to happen.
Yeah, it happens. You just have to just enjoy the moment and know that something's going to change eventually. You don't know what, because you can't predict the future, as I said, but whatever it is, you just deal with it when it comes. It might annoy you, right? Because it might be something that you weren't prepared for. But if you know that the world is changing, then realize that everything about the world changes, right? Here's another philosophy. If the world is changing all the time, then everything is a part of the world. So everything is changing. And that's actually, I just kind of thought of that. So you won't get, yeah, you won't hear that on Better Call Daddy, but definitely, I mean, the world is always going to change. And no matter what you do, something's going to change. It's never going to stay the same, no matter what it is. And everything inside the world is going to change, including anything you do. Your accomplishments are great when you make them, but 5 days later, are people going to really remember that accomplishment? And of course, if you do something wrong and hurt people, they're not going to remember anything that you did that was great. They always remember the bad things. That's how I notice. I mean, that's not a negative thing. That's just the way it is. So what you did today might change tomorrow, or what people's perception of you did, what you did. I mean, let's say, you cured a disease, and okay, you cured a disease, and people are so happy. They're using that cure, and they're no longer getting that disease. And then 1 year later, your disease is causing another disease, and people are dying faster. What are people going to remember? Right? So that's just kind of an extreme example, but yeah, I mean, I'm kind of going off in a tangent, but my point is that yes, I knew something would be changing, and whatever I can do, I have the skills to work with that change, and that's whatever it is. So I'm happy about that.
There's no better topic to talk about things changing all the time than music.
Yeah.
You mentioned you're a musician, so we'll start from the start. Kind of, how did you get into becoming a musician, and what kind of music are you involved with?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question, and that's a long story. I'll keep it short. When I was 4 years old, my mother came to me, and we had a piano, and she said, "Would you like to learn how to play piano?" And I said, "Yes." And by 6 years old, I took my first piano lesson. I remember it well. My teacher was Mrs. West, and she was a great teacher, very patient with me. And at age 9, I started the saxophone. In my early 50s, I taught myself the guitar, and then I taught myself bass. I've been writing music ever since I was about 11. And really, that is, I mean, I should have gone for a record deal, but I never did. So I didn't know how to do it at the time. It wasn't like we have now, where you could just kind of put your music out there on the internet, because when I was a kid, there was no internet. So I really just kept writing music, and just kept writing and writing. And at that time in the 80s, when I was growing up, it was mostly about 80s rock and the heavy metal and new wave, right? It was basically new wave and heavy metal were dominating the charts. It was kind of, you were either into heavy metal, or you were into new wave, or you were into disco, and it was like kind of those three. I went to the rock direction, because that's what I always liked, and that's what I did. So those are the three. I mean, there were other genres of music like classical and country and rap and things like that, but hip hop wasn't even big back then. So like it is now. So I just started writing a lot of heavy metal. That's what I loved. That's what I listened to. I listened to all those bands that were coming out of England and the United States mostly, and Australia. And that's where I was. So now heavy metal isn't as big as it was in the 80s, except there are a lot of groups that are coming back, like a lot of 80s groups are now. So I noticed that a lot of the bigger music now is the pop. And one thing I said is, I will never use a drum machine. I hate drum machines. I was saying this about 10 years ago. Anytime I recorded, I always used a real drummer. And then I realized that the most popular music has drum machines. So I actually bought myself a drum machine, which was the Alesis, and I have it actually right here, about 2 inches away from me. The Alesis SR18 is an amazing piece of equipment, and it really does the job. So that's another good example of saying that things change, especially when I was saying, even 5 years ago, I'll always have a real human being as a drummer. And now I don't even think about it anymore. Program the drum machine. So you can't predict the future. But that's musically, that is my whole entire journey. And I have a lot of music on Spotify. If you want to hear it, you just look up Bruce Chamoff on Spotify and you can listen to anything. You know, my music has changed as well.
Yeah, I think the world of music completely has changed because I've noticed it recently as it seems like music is pretty much transferred completely to TikTok. Like previews of all new music, if it's not on TikTok, it's pretty much not gonna blow up to the heights everyone's expecting. It's so weird to me, and especially in the music world, it's country music that is flying now at the minute. And it's things like you said that you can never predict because I remember growing up with all those people like Justin Bieber and things were blowing up. There was never a time where I thought whenever I was listening to Justin Bieber everywhere, that it was going to turn into someone with a guitar talking about farming. I never believed that country music would blow up to the point it is, but it seems to have done that. Do you think there's anything in specific about country music that is making it so popular now?
Country music is really not the same type of country music that it was when I was growing up. It combines a lot. I mean, look at Taylor Swift. I mean, she's the biggest singer in the world right now. I mean, there are other successful singers like her, but nobody is more successful right now in this moment of time than her. And she has something like 170 million monthly listeners on Spotify, which is incredible. And she started as a country singer, then she turned to pop. But I will always look at her as a country singer because that's how she started, right? When you look at other country singers like Shania Twain or Keith Urban, they combine rock into their country. So
Yeah.
I mean, I did not like the country music when I was growing up, which is why I never mentioned it. But now it's a little bit more, in my own opinion, it's a little bit more listenable. I don't think that's a word, but it's
Probably.
easier. Yeah, it's easier to listen to at this point. And I still don't listen to it as much, but I do like it now better than I did when I was listening in the 70s.
Yeah, it has just rose out of nowhere, and I really agree with that point of it's not really just like pure country anymore, because even if you look at someone like Morgan Wallen, you can play most Morgan Wallen songs anywhere really, like they could kind of appeal to everybody. But it's whenever you mention Taylor Swift, the first thing came to my head was Beyonce. She's now kind of like, I don't know if she's fully doing it, but she's started transitioning into a country singer.
I'm sorry, who was that?
Beyonce.
Yeah, I don't quite get that. I think Beyonce, she does well with the music that she was doing with Destiny's Child in her solo career. So I know that a lot of musicians from non-country genres still transfer into country, which is quite interesting. I mean, a good example is Darius Rucker from Hootie and the Blowfish. And also, as I recall, there was a heavy metal band in the 80s named Keel. And Ron Keel was the singer. And he was a really good heavy metal singer. He had a really good range. And then he became a country singer. I didn't quite understand that transition. But whatever floats your boat, that's what he wanted. And that's what happened. I'm thinking maybe he did that because heavy metal kind of died out in the 90s to grunge.
Yeah.
So when you had bands like Judas Priest and Black Sabbath that are still amazing today, and Iron Maiden, heavy metal wasn't doing so well in the 90s because of bands like Nirvana and Soundgarden and Pearl Jam. So I'm assuming that some of these heavy metal singers had to move on to other genres in order to stay current. And I'm thinking that's possibly why he went to country. Although I don't know how current country was at that point either. But it's still an interesting observation that country still stands the test of time. And it has evolved as well into more mainstream genres. Like I said, Taylor Swift doing pop, and even Carrie Underwood, who, when you listen to her music, she's more country than Taylor Swift, but she's got some of those rock elements too to keep her current as well. So yeah.
I haven't had anyone involved in music on my podcast yet, but there's one question I've been waiting for someone to come on to ask.
Cool.
Same when you're performing live, is there ever any bit of you that is worried you're going to forget your own lyrics?
Oh, it's happened to me.
It drives me insane. Every time I see a live performance, I'm always sitting thinking, like, what would happen if they like just completely stopped or they said the wrong words here?
It happens, and we're only human. Singers are singers. They're human beings, and they'll forget. There's one of two outcomes, and if you forget the lines, the worst thing you can ever do is admit that you forgot the line. And here are the two outcomes. Number one, if people already know your music, they're already singing along with you. And if they're singing along with you and they know your lyrics, even if you, the lead singer, forget the lyrics, your audience won't. They just won't, because they play your music over and over and over again. They're going to memorize those lyrics like the back of their hand. And if you forget the lyrics, they won't even hear it, because they're thinking of themselves singing the lyrics. They only hear themselves singing the lyrics. If you're in a big arena where everybody's singing the lyrics, even if the lead singer forgets, as long as the lead singer doesn't go, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. I don't know what to say," it's not going to be a problem. Now, the other flip side of that is if your song is not so well known and you forget the lyrics, you just try your best to ad-lib, and try not to pause. And this is harder than it sounds. It's easier said than done, but if people don't know your songs very well and they see you perform and you forget the lyrics, they're not going to know that you actually forgot the lyrics because they haven't heard the song anyway. So just ad-lib somehow. I mean, there are times when actually, the weird thing is, in band rehearsal, I forget the lyrics a lot. When I'm live, I never forget the lyrics. So there's something about playing out live that just makes you remember the lyrics. I don't know what it is. Maybe you're hearing other people singing your lyrics and then you sing along with them instead of them singing along with you. But I don't worry so much about it. I mean, I don't get stage fright. I love public speaking. I don't care how many people I'm in front of. I can sing in front of, or I can do public speaking for 5,000 people. I don't really care. I love it. So, hey, I got to actually cut this short in about 5 minutes.
That's no problem at all. To be honest, the only other thing that I actually had to ask, which was music related, was I asked comedian Mike Knox when he was on about this, and I want to see what it's like in a different industry. Have you ever been heckled by someone in the audience, and how does it feel, or how do you react to it?
Well, I tried stand-up comedy once, and I got heckled. But then that's kind of normal for stand-up comedy. I've never been heckled. No, I've never been heckled as a public speaker or a singer. And I thought that was kind of cool. I think it's great that never happened. But no, I've never, I mean, I'm not a comedian. I'm not a stand-up comic. I tried it once, it didn't work. But what I love to do, the music, playing music, singing, and public speaking, no, it's never happened. Thankfully.
That's why I wanted to ask you, because Mike said if he doesn't get heckled, he's doing something wrong.
No, I don't know if I agree with that. I think people who heckle you, they do it. It's an individual thing on the person, on the heckler, right? I mean, if you're doing terribly, and let's say the comedian is doing terribly, and the person in the audience is not a heckler, they're not going to heckle you because they're not a heckler, but they're thinking in the back of their mind, "Oh, that comedian sucks," right? And
Yeah.
I'll never see this person again. I won't spend money. I won't waste my money or my time. But if you are a heckler, then I think that's individual. I think you're going to heckle somebody whether they're good or not, and whether they're doing a great job or whether they're doing it right or wrong. So I don't really agree with that. I mean, I think the biggest feedback that you can get as a public speaker is when you're talking and you look at people in the audience and they're nodding their head or they're smiling. So I believe that as a public speaker, when people aren't nodding with what you say, or they're not giving you feedback, that's kind of like heckling when you think about it. It's a silent heckling, but it's like the crickets type of heckling. You know, you hear the
Yeah.
crickets. That there's nothing for me as a public speaker that's worse than that, is not getting feedback. That feedback can come in many forms. And maybe what he was saying is that heckling is a form of feedback. So yeah, if you get heckling, you're getting feedback, you're doing something right. But a lot of people hate it too. A lot of people hate heckling, and it makes them think they're not doing a good job. That's how I look at it. And when you're singing, I mean, I just played out on May 19th in New York City, and I saw other bands moving to my music, and I saw other people singing my lyrics. That is the most amazing feeling in the world when you're a singer, when you write lyrics and you write music and you see people singing the words that originally were created inside your head at one point in the past, and now it's coming. What was in your head is coming out of somebody else's mouth. That is the truly uplifting feeling for anybody. I mean, you can ask anybody who performs on stage.
I have one last question, then I will release you, which is public speaking is pretty much the biggest fear really on the planet. It may not be documented as much, but it definitely is. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who has got a real bad crippling fear of public speaking, what would it be?
Prepare your presentation and practice as much as you can ahead of time. And there will be no need to fear anything if you're prepared and practiced.